So what we're going to talk about is the importance of understanding the standard and how it impacts your student achievement, and then look at how to break down a standard, the grade level standard, and then once you do that, be able to apply that knowledge to determine the skills that your kids lack in order to, and how you're going to instruct that, provide instruction, provide that SDI in order for them to, for you to close that gap for the kids. So that's basically what we're going to be doing. Now, I think this is really interesting. Have any of you guys heard of the opportunity myth? Okay, good. So it's called, the New Teacher Project conducted a study, and they called it the opportunity myth. And what was really interesting is, well, what they examined was the quality of the students' academic experiences and in school, and its effect after they leave 12th grade. And what they found is most cases, and this is talking about all students, not just special education students, but all students, they did what they were asked to do in school. They completed all their assignments, they did exactly what they were supposed to do, but they found that they still were not ready to be successful in real life. And then they saw that students were missing out on strong instruction, particularly like them doing the thinking. Like the example that I saw Dion do with you guys this morning when you all did that activity. Usually by the end of the day, the teachers, you guys teach. You guys are worn out by the end of the day, and the kids, they haven't really done any mental thinking, and they weren't engaged, and they're not tired because you all do all the work instead of them. So that strong instruction, you put it back on them and let them do the thinking. And in this project, they said that wasn't really happening. And then students that are at, on that poverty level, English learners, and students with disability did not have as much access to grade level standards and content as their peers. And last, the good thing is they did find 4 key resources that could help with that and that would impact or improve student achievement. So that's what we're going to talk about. So the first things that we found were kind of concerning, but then I'm like, okay, so this is concerning, but we found this that will help you correct that and be able to close that gap. So number 1 is consistent opportunities to work on grade level assignments. And I think the key word there will be consistent, because it's hit and miss, but sometimes it's not grade appropriate. And it's not just for our kids, and we're not talking about, this is talking about in the regular classroom. It's not talking about when you're working on the goals, it's just that expectation of meeting that grade level content. Strong instruction, where the students do most of the thinking. That's when you have those engagement, those activities that you have them doing the work, and engagement. And the last one is high expectations. Teachers who hold high expectations for students and believe that they can meet those standards. And that one they found is what grade level are you guys?
High school.
Okay. Okay. I was just making sure for when we get into the. Are you high school also?
Yes.
Okay. Just real quick, I'm just starting out with the New Teacher Project did a study called the Opportunity Myth, and they found basically that students were not, even though they did exactly what they were asked to do, and in school they were not ready for real life. And the reason being, and we're actually getting ready to talk about how we're going to prevent that from happening from this point forward. And so the last one, holding high expectations, and out of these 4, the number 4 of teachers holding high expectations proved to have the greatest impact for student achievement. If the students believe, if they think you believe in them, then they believe in themselves, and they're going to do better. So I want you to think just for a second about if you have either observed a classroom or lesson, or taught your own lesson, or maybe co-taught at any lesson or any classroom environment. And think about these 4 things, and can you come up with some examples and non-examples of these things that you saw? I know I can, several. When and just think about that just for a second. I mean, you don't have to name names, you don't have to, like I said, examples and non-examples. So think about that just for a second if you want to kind of jot it down, and then I'll give you guys a second to, if you want to share with your partner or share out loud of some of what that might look like. I just set my timer for a minute. Okay. Does anybody want to share out loud to the whole group some examples or non-examples of something that they have either seen or done in a lesson that would represent these 4 key resources?
Sure. I have definitely not set my expectations high enough. Sometimes I'm guilty occasionally of assuming that there is some work they won't do, so I just won't assign them. Which I know is a bad thing, but I'm guilty of it sometimes.
Well, we do that because we care about the kids, and we don't want them to get the frustration. And I'm glad you spoke up and said that, because I do that too. I did it. I was in the classroom for 20 years, and those are your babies, and you just like, oh, and you do that, especially when you're co-teaching, you're like, oh yeah, that'd be too hard, they can't do that. And you automatically, and you don't even present it to them because you don't know that, you think they can't. So yeah, I've done that too. Anybody else? I know for me, I've also seen the consistent opportunities to work on grade appropriate assignments. I had, or maybe it kind of falls maybe under the 2 and the 3, to be honest. It was a co-teaching setting that I was in. I went into, it was a social studies class, 4th and 5th grade. And the teacher, it loved the kids, all that, but his assignments were always handouts, and it was fill in the blank. Now, his handout came from a 5th grade workbook or whatever, but that's all they did. They sat in their desk and they completed those worksheets and fill in the blank about whatever social studies lesson that they were working on. So, I mean, the grade appropriate assignments, I get technically it was 5th grade, but it was not strong instruction. There wasn't hardly any instruction at all. And it definitely wasn't the deep engagement. So what ended up happening there is you go back to what Dean talked in the other session, that if you all were in here, you end up providing accommodations, because I mean, if he's got to fill out that sheet of paper, you got to read it to him because it's on the 5th grade level. And so you're not really getting any kind of instruction. So that one, is one that always sticks out in my mind every time I do that. It just hurts me a little bit. But
You know, Chas, I was listening, I'm always listening, I'm a nerd, okay, I can't help it. But I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was Anne Beninghoff, the lady who wrote this book, talking, and she said something that just smacked me right in the face. And she said specially designed instruction and access to the curriculum and the standards is a civil right for students with disability. It's a civil right. And so we're violating the civil right when we don't do the instruction. If we just accommodate all day long, we're not really teaching anything. And when you listen to Archer talk about just teaching and learning, what impacts learning is good teaching. Good teaching is good teaching. It was in 1977, and it is today in 2022.
and we can get on that soapbox really easy when you start going into co-teaching and because I mean we can all get on that because it's difficult to do.
It is, it's hard.
But I like this quote. I just always throw this in there. My teacher thought I was smarter than I was, so I was. And that goes back to those high expectations. And a lot of our kids don't have a lot of self-esteem anyway or self-confidence. So just keep that in mind, those high expectations. Okay, so starting going to into the clarity. So this is a quote by John Hattie. It's one of the keys to improving schools is to ensure teachers know the learning intentions and success criteria of their lessons, know how well they are attaining these criteria for all students, and know where to go next in light of the gap between the student's current knowledge and the understanding and the success criteria. So where the kids are right now and then where they need to be, that success criteria is, we'll get into that in a second, but that's on that standard, what they have to know. And this can be maximized in a safe and collaborative environment where teachers talk to each other about teaching. So with all that being said, so basically to be able to help student achievement is that you as teachers know what those learning intentions are and how to get there, how to get them there. How do you know they are going to have it? That's your success criteria. And if you don't know that, I mean, we'll get into that in a second, but you have to know that. And in order for you to know that, the bottom part is that safe and collaborative environment, which theoretically goes in with your PLCs. I hope that your schedules fall to where you can PLC with your regular ed teachers. I had over 20 years, some years it did, some years it didn't, most years it did not. So what I would have to do is just kind of just get up with, on the side and try to talk about that to get the reading lesson and things like that. But with that PLC, your veteran teachers in the building, special ed, regular, whatever, for your content, it would be whatever content you're in, it will be your regular ed people, and then for just special ed stuff or material, then it would be your special ed veteran teachers in your building, or maybe a neighboring school, or because I know small districts only have like one middle school, one high school. That is where you're going to get a lot of your information. And when I first started teaching, if I did not have, because my classroom was actually like this. This separated, I was in the middle, and I had a teacher on this side and a teacher on this side, and it was all of us were the special ed. And if I did not have those two ladies in my life, I would not be standing right here today, because they helped me so much, and I picked their brains. And I promise you, they do not care to help you. That's because that's one of your best resources. So I'll say that and I'll move on.
Hey, can you go back to that for just
Sure.
1 second? I want to ask a question. The day-to-day, we really want to connect, standards-based IEPs, the targets and all that, but how do we know? It says know how well they are attaining these criteria. How do we know that? What we just talked about a few minutes ago. Progress monitoring, right? And not just the assessment and knowing how well they're doing, but what do we do in the very next step after we take that assessment? If it doesn't change our instruction, it ain't worth the paper it's written on. If we don't do formative assessment to understand how much they learn and then think outside the box about how we can get it across better, then we're beating our head against the wall, so to speak, and we know what happens. Your head gets sore after a while, right? So, go ahead, I'm sorry. I didn't-
No, you're good. No, it's good how to tie it all together, because that's.
Yeah.
Okay, the last one, it's imperative that you find clarity in the standards to be able to translate the clear learning expectations. And I think when we get into start breaking down that standard, the problem is sometimes is we don't really understand to what level the standard is asking. We only maybe get bits and pieces of it, or, you know, or not the whole standard. So that's what we're gonna look at. And I bolded this one, if the teacher is unclear about what the students must know, then it's absolutely impossible for the students to know, because you're the one, you have to know in order to relay that information to them. So, how do you do that? How do you get your desired results? So, we're gonna flip the traditional model. So we're gonna start with the end. Keep the end in mind instead of the beginning. So looking at this, these two models here, you have the backward design, which is what we're gonna look at, and then the traditional model. In the traditional model, and this, when I first started teaching, this is how I developed my lesson plans. I looked at my standard, and then I was like, okay, so here's the standard. How am I gonna, let's have my activities. What am I gonna do in my lesson in order to teach them that standard? Okay, how am I gonna assess them after I teach it? And then I'm gonna have my learning outcomes. I did that when I first started teaching. But if you look at it differently, and when you look at the standard, and then the learning outcomes, so you're looking at that standard and you really think about it, and you say, okay, what is it that my kid has to know? What do they have to know to be able to meet that standard? And once you answer that question, then you're going to say, okay, how do I know, how am I going to know they know it? What kind of assessment am I going to use? What can I do to give them, or present to them, for them to be able to show me that they know that standard? And then after you do that, then the last thing is like, okay, now how am I going to teach it to them? This is what they have to know. This is how I'm going to know that they know it, and this is how I'm going to teach them. So it's completely different. And when you look at it, I mean, it's easier, really, because you're meeting, because the most important thing is the learning outcome. And so these are just some questions that, if you have your PLC, just to think about that backwards design. Basically, at the end of the day, it's what do my students need to know, and how are they going to do it? Okay, now let's look at the breaking down of what the actual standards look like. Now, how familiar are you all, have dug into the standards and actually look at the standards? Have you all really had a chance to do that, or you just kind of focus on more? Okay. So, well,
We're just swimming,
yes, I completely understand, and I want to share this with you. I'm going to have them edit this part out probably, but this is my 4th year at the co-op, and I came, like I said, I was 20 years in the classroom, and I sat in that interview, and one of the questions, and I was interviewing for this position, thank goodness I got it, but one of the questions they asked me was, how familiar are you with the reading and writing standards? And my reply was, I said, well, I don't know. I don't know, or I didn't. I've learned a lot since I've been here, but I did not know because I was K-12. The only standards that I was familiar with was whatever my fifth grade, regular ed teacher, whatever standard she was working on for that lesson, I went and looked at that standard, and then that's what I looked at. And that's the only time I looked at it, was when she was getting ready to do that lesson, because like you said, you're swimming, you have all this other stuff going on. And I didn't really understand, and what I said too is when we write our IEPs, we have to use that progression to go back. Our kids ain't on the 5th grade level or the 9th grade level, so we have to go back and find in those standards where they are. So that's all I had, is where the standards where my kids were and the standard that I was teaching that week. That was the knowledge I had, because you just had so much. So I get it, but the reason I ask is because I wanted to kind of show you, and I'm hoping that just having this basic understanding of how it all connects is the purpose today, so that you can look at that and be able to understand how you're connecting your kids and their IEP goals to meet this standard, okay? So, at the top, and I have, if you print out, you probably don't have it in your rooms, but if you print out the whole reading and writing standards, this is them. Right, it's K-12, this is all of them. So obviously, you guys are not going to be able to have time to do this. So, but they're all laid out exactly the same. So at the top is your guiding principle. So every standard you have, every standard, has a guiding principle. That is what, by the time they graduate high school, what they want to have to know. This particular example I use is, this is 5th grade, and this is, RL is reading literature. So and then for your informational text, it would be RI. This is the grade level, and this is standard 1, okay? So this is what they have to know by the time they graduate high school. These standards leads up to your broader goal. So this is what you kind of, by the time they graduate, this is what they need to do. The middle part, for me, for special ed teachers, I think are the most important pieces. That's called your progression. Because the middle tells, like this is a 5th grade standard, so the middle part is the standard, okay? Then it also goes back 1 grade level, and it tells you this is what 4th grade standard looks like that they had to master before they get to the 5th. And then they also go to the 6th grade, so they give you grade level below, grade level above, in order so you can see that continuum and that consistency between the standards. But as you all know, you're going to have to go back more than 1 grade level, because if they are just 1 grade level behind, they're probably not in special ed, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, the bottom part is the multi-dimensionality, and what this does is it breaks down the different parts of the standard. This piece down here helps you get to that level to make sure that you're hitting all pieces of the standard. Okay, so the maroon is the content piece. What do they have to be able to do? They've got to quote accurately from a text. Okay, so then you ask yourself, well, what does that mean? Quote accurately from a text. Well, if you read a passage, you're going to have to pull specifics from that text correctly, based on whatever question you're doing. Okay, and you have to do that when the text is explaining it explicitly. So you're answering questions. So if you're presented with a story and the kid asks a question, or you ask them a question, they have to be able to pull it from that text. Okay, and this is the big one. And I think this is where a lot of students like, oh yeah, they met it, because they can answer who, what, when, or why questions. But that little bitty word right here, and when drawing inferences, that's where a lot of we kind of miss, and we don't get the whole standard. They'll do the who, what, when, where, why questions, say, oh yeah, we met that standard, and move on, when in reality, they can't draw inferences. So that's where you got to really that's where breaking it down and understanding the whole picture. Okay, real quick, talking about those progressions, and I like to mention this because it is important for special ed teachers, because like I said earlier, you need to go back more than one grade level. So in the back of your standards, this huge document, starting on page 390 to 456 are all the progressions together. Now what that means is, I made myself just a separate ones. These are just standard progressions. Now my disclaimer on this is you cannot use just this to understand standards, okay? You cannot do that. But I think this guides you to pinpoint time to go back where your students might fall, so that then you can refer to that grade level standard in the full standard and understand it. So what I mean by that is, let's just say most of you guys are either middle or high. So when it starts with the reading foundations, so I'm just going to flip over. Okay, so reading standards for literature. So it starts, you have your guiding principle at the top. Students will analyze how point of view, perspective, and purpose shape the content and style of the text. Okay, so let's say your child is in 8th grade. So you go down here, they have to analyze characters and readers' perspectives and how the differences create effects, including but not limited to suspense, humor, and empathy. Now you guys can probably have students that you have taught that you're thinking in your head that are around that age and know that there's no way. So, and then this goes back to, if you're sitting in trainings talking about writing your IEP goals, and when you hear that your IEP goals have to be standards-based, a lot of misconception is, well, my kid's in 8th grade, that's the 8th grade standard, so I have to write this as part of my IEP goal. That's not what that's talking about. And I'm glad Danny Paul's in here, he can elaborate on this when I get finished and fill in any blanks. So what this means is, okay, he's an 8.6, or he's in 8th grade. Well, he can't do that. So, but I can look, and this is the same goal. So if I go back and I want to go read all these grade levels before, because these are all prerequisites of what they have to have before they reach here. Well, we have to, by doing our formative assessments, we can figure out what skills they lack and what skills they do have, and find where that falls. So for example, if a kid, the 4th grade one says, compare and contrast the point of view of first and third person narrators and the effect they have on the reader. So you might have some of your kids that can do compare and contrasting. If they can do that, then you can write your goals starting at this 4th grade level. And so your IEP goal might say something about extending on the compare and contrast. But they can't do this yet, but if you teach them the compare and contrast, you're getting them one step closer to reaching that grade level standard. Does that make sense? So, and all these progressions is for all the standards, but I like it because it's all on one page. But what you would do, like I said, you can't just use your progressions. Once you determine that kid is on the 4th grade, then you can go to your reading standards and pull that out to help go into more detail about what skills that they would need and things like that. Okay, now for the fun stuff. Okay. This is the same thing, like I have the same one, this is a 5th grade standard, and then this is a high school standard. So most of you are middle high, so we'll just look at this high school standard. And I'm going to go through this example, but I'm going to give you guys time to actually work through this. Now, a couple things is, this is a graphic organizer that will help you, and yes, essentially you would do this for each standard. You're not going to, but it's the process that helps you think how to look at each standard. And you can, once you fill out a couple, then it kind of guides your thinking. So for example, actually when I did this one, because my 20 years, I only taught 2 years at the high school level, and the rest of my tenure was K-5. So I wasn't real familiar with middle school, and my high school career was early. So, and there's new standards, so my familiarity is more with the lower grades, more so than high school. So when I was looking at this, I still pulled this up on the screen. I didn't see it, I filled this one out as an example, but when I was going through another lesson, I still pulled it up as a guide, just so that I can think through that standard and ask myself, what does that kid really need to know? At the end of the day, what am I need to know? So you can use this to help guide your thinking.
So let me ask a question. So when you look at the body of the standard, and at some point as you work down that continuum or work through those progressions, are you turning those standards into learning targets or I can statements, or
Yes.
is that okay?
Yes.
And so one of the keys then for me would be that when you are filtering that down, that you're keeping a narrow focus on the learning and on the critical content, like we were talking about this morning, right?
Yes.
Archer, it kind of fits into that, right?
Yes.
So, and those I can statements are for one lesson, not a broad number of lessons, but just one lesson, one narrow focus on that one lesson, so that the clear target is student friendly and they know
Yes.
what the expectation is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is, if you notice, the little worksheet here is kind of set up the same way the standards are. So I will let you, if you, we'll do a little group activity here in just a second. So at the top, this one, just example, this is reading literature, 9 and 10, the second standard, 10.2. This one, I like to read them out loud because I don't know about the other grade levels, but I tell you, reading and writing, they like to make a big mouthful when they like to talk about standards. Determine a theme or central idea of a text and analyze in detail its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details. There's a lot of ands in that. There's a lot of different things that they have to be able to accomplish. So when you're thinking about that, it's like, okay, so then I just, the first two, you literally just copy it straight out of the standard. You copy the standard, you copy the guiding principle. Students will, and that's, this one at this point, when they're in the 9th and 10th grade, it's going to be very similar to your guiding principle because it's the high school. Okay, so then here, what you're looking at, like I said, this middle one would be this grade level, straight in the middle. What do they need to know to be able to meet that expectation? Okay, so with this one, well, they have to be able to analyze over the whole course of the text. So they have to be able to analyze the text, first of all, and then they got to be able to, as the text progresses, what changes are happening, be able to compare those two and analyze why it's happening. Okay. And then they have to be able to have specific details to support that. Okay, then you go back. Well, before they can do what's in the middle, what do they have to do beforehand? Now, for this one, if you notice, we put summarize and determine theme. That is not an 8th grade level expectation. But what I did is I went through my progressions and thought about, backing it up. And so the important thing, when you think about it, at the end of the day, we want kids to read. Why do we want kids to know how to read? Why? Why do we have to read?
Function.
To comprehend text, right? We have to be able to read it just to comprehend anything you want to learn about. Yeah, to function, any instructions or to be able to comprehend text. So in order to do that, you got to be able to summarize because, kids, you want to summarize something, they want to tell you every little detail that was told to them. So they need to be able to summarize is the big one and determine theme. Well, then they have to know, make sure they know what theme is. So you keep going back. Okay, now, the bottom piece is, this part gets real detailed. And I will say, when we do this activity, we have never completely finished it, okay? So when I give you a few minutes here, you're not gonna get them all. But it's just something to think about. What this does, all these questions, is it just helps guide your thinking, really narrows that in. And once you do that exercise a couple times, then when you start to do others, it'll come more natural. So for time's sake, I'm gonna go ahead and be quiet, because since all of you guys are special, I wanna actually get down into how we identify those skills to write your IPO. That's my exciting piece that I like about it. So I'm gonna just leave this up here. You all have those handouts. I actually need to, right here, this QR code, if you want to scan this, it takes you to the standards on your phone. And pick as a group, and if you want to come to another table, one of these two tables, and work with them, or one of you, some over here, just so you don't work by yourself. Just pick a standard, it does not matter. And go ahead and work through this, how to break down a reading and writing standard. And as you do that, then I'll come around and if you have any questions and things like that. And the reason for this is just so that you can just kind of get some familiarity and clarity of the standard, and learn how to see what needs to be, what your kids need to know. This is my favorite part.
Oh, this is my first year in
This is what social studies for my kid.
preschool for
Right. We have a baseline for 15 years. And it helps filter down and get that discreet.
Yeah.
This is what I'm trying to get to.
I love it.
Okay. And I'm gonna set my timer, let's see, I got about 20 minutes.
And so school started by, and you got IFAs to.
I wanna say it for God's sake, let me see if I can.
It's made it here.
This week it's supposed to be my brother's mother again. I have no, that's what I need to put in stuff. It's crazy. Cause in my head, I'm going to help these kids. No. I'm gonna pay for it.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, I'm good.
How can I do it?
I do know some of the, I did a test teacher with this supposed to be. Some of the ones with bad people, I'm familiar with them. So, I'm not sure. Let's see, I'm not saying it's great, but one program I do is.
Which grade? We've got
I'm fourth grade.
so I asked
Who's that grade?
Okay. Yeah. And guys, as you work through this, there's really, there's not gonna be one set answer on these. Cause the progression before, essentially it would be how far back you need to go based on your students.
I know I don't have these.
I do it every time. Talk too much. It's like, I have a new game strategy.
because we ain't done anything, so like I said, I'm learning my first IP right now, so I'm learning on one tool what I need to do with this, so. So then I started master classes, and they pretty much talk the same way, it's just how the teaching thing goes. So,
How do you do your master's degree?
and so far, I'm really liking classes. There's just a lot to it. And everybody told me that too, is that they'll be prepared to do a lot of work. And so like first class, first week, read 3 chapters, more for craft. I want to add the weeds. Where's the introduction, you know, who you are, what you're doing, so.
Oh, that's what that means.
This book's huge. I keep trying to scroll down, but it's the second grade.
That's probably, you're looking at your phones, it's probably.
Y'all try to quick, it keeps zooming in on me.
Yeah.
So probably by the time we're ready to start talking about it, I'll find where we need.
Well, they were there's so much, but.
Well, like I said, I'm working on my first IEP right now. So literally, I'm just now trying to figure out, and I'm having to use existing data because I took and did any progress monitors. So I'm having to try and figure out where my kid is one time right now. And then I got another 2 more next month, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
So this is my first year, Stephanie.
For the kids.
So the lady that would call me, she did all of that in August. You know, I'm thinking it would already be, you know what I'm saying? So I had one, and so what I've been doing is she has a progress monitor in the book. And so I've just been going back and looking, and I was in the classroom, so I know these kids too. So I think they had like, maybe they only had that 4 times, and they did pretty good, but in my mind, I'm thinking it's been summer.
It's supposed to be late star.
Late star, we're gonna start with this. Even though they've kind of done with it, you know, so like that's kind of, it's been, just maybe some of it, like he said, you may eat like her, you know, maybe see it more. You know,
Right on.
I
And then we start that.
one of our guys, Kyle, he had also used to pay one.
It's crazy. Yeah. Well, and I tell you what I always did too, regardless, because like you said, rarely, I think it carries over. I mean, it must always carries over. So you have those goals at least for a little while. But I always, regardless, just start, just to get my own baseline. So the first few times I see them, just for my own, I don't know, I just, well, like you said, there's summer and like all that stuff
Well,
that
so,
just.
like, I could clearly see they haven't met like this, like the one hour, because there's lots of data, but then they start on the next one, there's just like 4 pieces of data. They've done pretty good, but I'm gonna start here.
Yeah.
That's what I did with one, I pulled up the progress one that they had, and the girl working on, she's making progress towards the second time she did. And as I push, she's working, she looks like she's starting to get and run with it. See what they do.
Well, and I know this kid too, and I know that over the summer he's probably, you know.
Some of them,
Yeah, so that's why, anyway, so just,
I had a couple of my kids up there familiar with it, because my dad was a teacher last year, so I saw them a lot.
Okay, we got about a minute left, and I know you all, that's not nearly enough time, but just for the sake of time, we'll move on after that.
Write that in there,
Mhm.
and then just do.
Well, background knowledge, which she was doing that from the previous year, so that would be like
that
the one before that. Yeah. And then what do they get to know, they commit that knowledge. And then, do her, at the next one, so you just.
So conceptually, the goal with this is that when we get to this point with each of our students, we're going to get IEP, we'll we'll be able to utilize this as a reference, you know, so we don't have to go back to the chapter.
Yes,
Okay.
and there's another piece here that, yes,
Yeah.
so you're getting, what the purpose of this would be to identify what skills are needed to meet this goal. That's the purpose of this. And then that's why I wanted to kind of hurry, because I wanted to get to this next one, because once you would use this and identify what skills you need to meet the goal, then you're going to go a little further to be like, okay,
Find even more.
what skills is my student lacking? And then it drives your goal, and you can end up writing your
Because
IEP
just
based
like
on that.
at work, you're running out of time.
Yeah,
And one predictor of success with any learning endeavor is going to be that the student understands what's expected. Okay, so if we use words like analyze, synthesize, predict, we have to explain those things. Okay, and what she's talking about is as we narrow our focus and we get it on one critical piece, that we make sure we take the time to explain what's expected. And that the goal is clearly.
and we're going
Yes.
to come up on that in just a
Yes.
second. So I'm gonna let this group back here, share out, like, what questions, or was this, what did you get
I
from
do
this activity, I
understand
guess?
what,
What are some things you found, some challenges? It is, it is, and it's not, yeah, and this is not something that you're gonna do to understand.
you guys got far with
This is definitely a training tool,
I
you
found it.
guys are not gonna do this, I mean, I'm not that far removed, trust me. But the purpose, like I said, I'll say that, so the purpose of doing this activity is just to help you know how to think through those standards and see what is expected, so you can meet those expectations, have that high level of expectation. And then we're gonna take it the next step to be like, okay, this is the skills, because you're trying to pull out the skills that they need to meet it. Okay, more when you're talking about the progress monitoring and write your IP goals, it goes into a discrete skill that they need to know. So we're looking at that. My example I had earlier was summarizing. What do they have to do to summarize? We'll keep breaking it down, keep breaking it down. And then we're gonna do the goals. So you can take this, essentially, see what skills is needed, generally speaking, to meet that goal. And then we're gonna go further and be like, okay, now what does my kid need and what is he lacking? Or this is what he needs to have, the skills he needs to have. Then we're gonna identify what he's lacking and my broader goals. So I'll move on, and maybe that'll make more sense, because I wanna get to that other one. So, what Dee Paul was just talking about, okay, now after you understand what the standard is, how are you gonna convey it to the students? So you're gonna get it, you have to put it into those student-friendly terms. Now, again, you don't want to, he set me up perfect. So like those terms, analyze, you're going to, and going back to what we talked about earlier, is like, oh, my kid's not gonna know what that means, so I'm gonna use a different term. Yes, you do that because they probably don't know what that means, but don't think they can't learn it. So when you're talking about it and introducing what analyze means, use the term analyze, but then also when you're talking, reword it to where what they understand what that means and know that what they're doing is essentially analyzing, because you want to get that word in their vocabulary, which will increase their comprehension, which will help them have that greater.
And linking to this morning, that's explicit instruction, that's where it comes in. That lesson, breaking it down, teaching the stuff and not the fluff, keeping that focus narrowed down on exactly what the expectation is. And that is a form of special design instruction.
Okay, so how do you convey it to your students? So again, to get students have to have buy-in to be able to pretty much do anything, because they want to know what I'm learning. Okay, now essentially that's going to be your learning goal. Now this is talking about like the target, or the standard, or learning goal, but it also, as special ed teachers, it could be their IEP goal that essentially aligns to that standard. So it's all about the learning goal. And why am I doing this? They have to have relevance. They have to understand that it is important for them to know this. They just do. Now, we always try to give real life examples, and I know you've all probably seen this meme going around. I've seen it a million times. It's like, oh, another day goes by and I've not used algebra today. Well, it doesn't have to be real life. I mean, if you can, it would be great. But let's just go back to the example I used about summarizing. Okay, if to be able to do the kids to be able to summarize, well, it could be to let them know that it's a prerequisite for a lesson down the road. You can say, well, you know, you need to learn to summarize right now, because later on in the year or before you leave the 9th grade, then you're gonna have to be able to summarize and compare and contrast two different texts. So you gotta be able to summarize first before you can do this. So it doesn't always have to be real life, but I mean, if you can make a real life connection, definitely do.
And it points right back to the outcomes from Andrew, if you're talking about compliance. One of the things that Justice Roberts used in his opinion was that goals need to be ambitious. So what Chastity's telling you is that when you look at Bloom's taxonomy, don't always stay with that recall. Don't always stay with the list. Shoot for the stars. Shoot for the moon. And you'll land among the stars, right? That old adage. So that's real powerful stuff. But you have to make sure that they're learning something along the way to build.
And then the students are also, they need to know okay, so you're teaching me this, so how do I know when I've got it? So then you tell them, and when you give them that success criteria. I mean, again, you're not going to come out and go, well, your success criteria is, but eventually you're going to say, okay, when you're able to do this, this, and this, you got it. Show them examples and non-examples. If you're doing a summary, as my example, here's an example of a great summary. This is, if you can do a summary like this, you've got it. And this is a non-example. This is not a good summary. Give them those visuals to see what would be acceptable. Okay, so real quick, so the learning goals is what? What are they doing? The relevance is why are they doing it? And the success criteria is how they know they've got it. Just real quick. And you guys will have access to this in that guide, folder, if you all want to go back and do that. So now that you have all that information, so essentially now you know what's expected on that grade level standard, you know how to convey it to the student, now what are you going to do with it? Okay, now we're going to be able to identify what skill the student is lacking, and then you're going to be able to apply that information to help and write in your present level of performance in your IEP, developing your IEP goal, and help determine your specially designed instruction. These are just, I always put this in here, these are the tools that you would need in your toolbox to help you with pretty much everything you do in education. With your standards, your IEP, the guidance document, and this, we call it the schoolhouse document. And this helps with, it gives examples of like SDI and things like that. Okay, we have just a couple minutes left. But that last handout that you guys have, so what I will essentially want you to be able to do is be able to take from this right here, so you know what skills generally that all kids need to meet that standard. And then by your assessments in the classroom that you're doing, you're going to know what your students lacks, where that gap is. This is where they are, this is where they need to be. So this is just another little graphic organizer that you can, and we're not going to have time to do it, but then you would put what the skills is here. Now, when I talk about skills, it would be like discrete skills, and when I say like specific, it has to be very, like, for example, if you need a kid to summarize and they can't read the words, they're not gonna be able to summarize it if they can't read. So you're gonna probably have to have a basic reading skill goal in order, or before you even talk about summarizing, because there's no need to have them be able to write a topic sentence in 3 points when they can't even read it. So that goal might be a reading goal of being able to read sight words or read phonetic, apply phonics and sound out words. So that's just, you gotta really think about that, and because you're still essentially, if you gotta teach them to read, and then once you can do that, then you can move on to the summarization part. So then, that's how you do that. So this is the skills, and then, and you can probably, especially like if they have several needs, if there's an intellectual disability, they're gonna have a lot of skills, more than one listed here that they're lacking. So you're gonna have to pinpoint not the most important, but what do they need first in order to build those others? And yeah, so you're not gonna have, if a kid, because I've seen it, because I tried to do this before when I was a young teacher, is I'm going, oh my gosh. So I had them do a reading go on, I can't think, like applying phonics to sound out words. And then I had them doing a reading comprehension goal. And then I had them doing and they're like, honey.
They can't be fun, they can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, and then I realized, okay, this comprehension piece is null until they learn how to read. So you pick that one first that they have to do and be able to build on that. So it is time for you guys to go. Like I said, normally this is a 3-hour session. I'm trying to cram it all in. But if you have any questions, and I feel like I just bombarded you, so I hope that I didn't bombard you too bad. But do you all have any immediate questions or want to share anything before we head out?
I can say that I'm slowly learning a little more every day, so.
Well, that's something.
a key factor up there, so.
Well, let me ask your all's honest opinion about this too, because of course we always do, just try to do better every time we do this. If you had more time, so think about it, this is typically a 3-hour training. If you had time to sit down and do this activity with a little bit more time to talk about filling that part out and actually do this piece to be able to tie these two together, do you think that would be beneficial for teachers to be able to see that connection? Okay.
I know that, I'm assuming that my teachers asked me if I could get them short for, they could look back for their combination stuff for the kids that they had in their classroom, so I made them an added lines page, so that so I'm sure somebody would be just saying for them.
Okay, yeah. Okay, well guys, I appreciate you all. If y'all don't have anything, I think you have about the next session will start till 2, I think, so you can have a few minutes to.
Next session starts at 2.
I do have a question.
Okay.
As a regular ed teacher, as I teach social studies in high school, how do I integrate literacy strategies for struggling readers?
I would start with that vocabulary piece, the educational program. And you know what, I'm not advised, because when you said high school, when you walked in, for whatever reason, I was cooking it until you started. And I apologize for
Let me just run.
Yeah, we'll have to do comprehension.
Chase, can I switch to my?
I just need to know if I need to because I know a lot about them.
So
Especially
Process.
in middle school, we're
I
gonna talk
some of
about.
the gaps.
But I know the details.
We're gonna talk about. We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna look at. We're gonna talk about some of the law that goes into what the referral looks like. Timelines, different categories. Yeah, but now I'm also concerned with those, because I live in this county.
So that's the end of the city schedule.
Yeah. I'm gonna circle back and get special instruction. So that's the one piece that you might not have, but we're doing fall conference right now. What district you work in? Oh, yeah. Trainings all the time based on. So if the director calls and says, hey, you should be over here and do a 3 hour, 6 hours, we can do a 3 hour pretty easy.
Well, I know like today.
He started school, so he may have more, but
Five.
he got
News, but
his.
Yeah.
He got all the,
Yes.
they don't all the same grade.
And this is really just kind of an overview. You can't scratch the surface in an hour. So what I would want you to do, first of all, would be get into the gal's document. We also have this thing called.
Are we all gonna meet back together?